Pedro Pascal is one of the biggest stars in Hollywood right now. The Mandalorian, The Last of Us, blockbuster movies, he's everywhere. But last night on The Late Show, Stephen Colbert made the mistake of suggesting that Pedro's success means he no longer needs to speak about Latin representation in Hollywood. What happened next was one of the most passionate, raw, and uncomfortable confrontations I've ever seen on late-night television. Pedro didn't hold back. "You don't understand my struggle," he said, tears of frustration in his eyes, before walking off set. Hit subscribe because this conversation about privilege, representation, and who gets to tell whose story needs to be heard. First of all, don't forget to like and subscribe to our video, and don't forget to write to us where you watch this video. The Late Show theme music faded as Stephen Colbert welcomed Pedro Pascal to enthusiastic applause. Pedro walked out in a sharp charcoal suit, his signature salt and pepper hair perfectly styled, that warm smile lighting up his face as he waved to the crowd. "Pedro Pascal, welcome back," Colbert said, standing to shake his hand. "Thank you, Stephen. Great to be here," Pedro replied, his Chilean accent subtle but present as he settled into the guest chair. "You are having the most incredible run," Colbert began. "The Mandalorian, The Last of Us, you're in everything. You're one of the biggest stars in the world right now." "I'm very fortunate," Pedro said with genuine humility. "Very grateful. And you've been very vocal lately about representation in Hollywood," Colbert continued, "specifically Latin representation. You gave a pretty passionate speech at the SAG Awards about it." Pedro's posture straightened slightly. "I did, yes. You talked about how there still aren't enough opportunities for Latino actors, directors, writers, that Hollywood still has a long way to go." "That's correct," Pedro said carefully. "But here's what I'm curious about." Colbert leaned forward with that interviewer smile. "You're incredibly successful. You're the lead in 2 of the biggest shows on television. You're getting movie offers left and right. Doesn't your own success prove that things have changed, that the opportunities are there now?" The audience made a slight noise. Pedro's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "No," he said simply. "No?" Colbert repeated, eyebrows raised. "No," Pedro said again. "My individual success doesn't mean the systemic problem is solved. That's not how systemic problems work. But you have to admit," Colbert pressed, "things are better than they were. There are more Latino actors getting roles, more stories being told." "Better isn't good enough," Pedro interrupted. "Better isn't equal. Better isn't just." "Fair point," Colbert conceded. "But don't you think your success story is inspiring? That you're proof that talent can succeed regardless of background?" Pedro was quiet for a moment, and something shifted in his eyes. "Stephen," he said slowly, "do you know how old I was when I got my first significant role?" "I don't." 39, Pedro said. 39 years old. I've been acting professionally for over 15 years. Struggling, auditioning, getting rejected. Do you know why? Why? Because casting directors didn't know what to do with me. I was too Latin for some roles, not Latin enough for others. I didn't fit their stereotypes. I wasn't the drug dealer, wasn't the gang member, wasn't the gardener or the maid's son they were looking for. But you eventually broke through." "Eventually," Pedro said, his voice hardening. "After years of struggling to pay rent, after watching less talented actors get roles because they fit a certain look, after being told to my face that my accent was too distracting even though it's barely noticeable." "But you did break through," Colbert repeated, "and now you're incredibly successful. So doesn't that prove?" "It proves I got lucky," Pedro cut him off. "It proves that the showrunners of Game of Thrones took a chance. It proves that Jon Favreau believed in me. It proves that Craig Mazin fought for me. But it doesn't prove the system works. It proves that individual people made individual choices that went against the system." "I think you're being a bit harsh." "Harsh?" Pedro's voice rose slightly. "Do you know how many talented Latino actors I know who never got that lucky break? Who are just as good as me, maybe better, but they're still struggling? Still waiting tables? Still wondering if they'll ever get a chance? That's unfortunate. But it's not unfortunate," Pedro said firmly. "It's systemic. It's by design. Hollywood has spent a century, creating a structure that favors certain people and excludes others. My success doesn't dismantle that structure. It's a crack in the wall, not a revolution. Colbert shifted in his seat. I think you might be downplaying your own achievement. I'm not downplaying anything, Pedro said. I'm putting it in context. I'm explaining that individual success stories don't solve collective oppression. Collective oppression seems like strong language for what? Pedro challenged. For an industry that still casts white actors to play Latino characters? That still pays Latino actors less than their white counterparts? That still expects us to be grateful for stereotypical roles because at least we're working? But you're not taking those stereotypical roles anymore, Colbert pointed out. You're playing complex leading characters. Because I finally have the power to say no, Pedro said. Do you understand that? I had to become successful enough to have leverage before I could refuse to play gang members and drug dealers. For 20 years, I didn't have that choice. I had to take what I could get. And now things are different for you. But not for everyone else. Pedro's voice was rising now. That's the point I'm trying to make. My success doesn't mean the next young Latino actor won't face the same struggles I did. The same barriers. The same stereotypes. The same exhausting fight for basic respect. I understand that. Do you? Pedro asked pointedly. Do you really understand what it's like to walk into audition rooms and see them disappointed because you don't look ethnic enough for the stereotypical role they're casting? Or too ethnic for the normal character? I'm sure that's difficult. Difficult doesn't begin to cover it, Pedro said, emotion creeping into his voice. It's soul-crushing. It makes you question your worth, your talent, your very existence in this industry. But you persevered. Because I had no other choice, Pedro said loudly. Because I couldn't imagine doing anything else. But so many of my friends gave up. Talented, brilliant actors who just couldn't take the rejection anymore. The constant message that they weren't quite right, weren't quite what Hollywood was looking for. Well, at least you stuck with it and succeeded, Colbert said with a slight smile. So there's a happy ending. Pedro stared at him. The studio went very quiet. A happy ending, Pedro repeated slowly. I just meant, there's no happy ending when the system that crushed my friends is still crushing new generations of Latino actors, Pedro said, his voice tight with controlled anger. There's no happy ending when I'm still one of the only Latino leads on major television shows. There's no happy ending when most of the Latino characters on TV are still criminals, servants, or immigrants with tragic backstories. I think you're being overly negative. Negative? Pedro's voice cracked. I'm being realistic. I'm being honest about the reality that you, as a white man who's been successful in entertainment your entire career, have never had to face. The audience gasped softly. Colbert looked taken aback. I don't think that's fair. What's not fair, Pedro said, leaning forward, is you sitting there telling me that my success means the problem is solved. What's not fair is you suggesting I should just be grateful and stop complaining. What's not fair is you dismissing decades of systemic discrimination because one Chilean actor finally got lucky. I never said stop complaining. You implied it, Pedro shot back. You said, but you're successful now, like that erases everything. Like my success means I should shut up about the struggles of my community. I think you're putting words in my mouth. I'm responding to your implications, Pedro said. You asked if my success proves things have changed. You pointed out that I'm not taking stereotypical roles anymore. You called it a happy ending. All of that suggests you think the problem is solved, or at least solved enough that I should stop talking about it. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? Pedro challenged. Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you're asking me to be quiet about racism because I personally benefited from a few people's willingness to see past it. Racism is a strong word. What else would you call it? Pedro asked. When casting directors assume all Latinos are criminals or servants. When studio executives believe American audiences won't watch shows with Latino leads. When Latino actors have to work twice as hard for half the recognition. What do you call that if not racism? I think it's more complicated then. It's not complicated, Pedro said firmly. It's racism, systemic, institutional racism. And the fact that you're uncomfortable calling it that is part of the problem. Colbert shifted uncomfortably. I'm just trying to understand your perspective. No, you're not, Pedro said, and there was real hurt in his voice now. You're trying to convince me that my perspective is wrong. You're trying to use my individual success to invalidate the collective struggle of Latino actors. You're doing exactly what the industry has always done, tokenizing one successful person of color to avoid addressing systemic problems. I don't think that's what I'm doing. But that's what you're doing, Pedro insisted. Whether you realize it or not, the frustration builds. I think we're talking past each other, Colbert tried. We're not talking past each other, Pedro said. You're just not listening. You're hearing my words, but you're not listening to what I'm actually saying. I am listening. Then why do you keep coming back to my personal success? Pedro asked. Why do you keep trying to use me as evidence that the problem is solved? Why can't you just hear me when I say that one person's success doesn't erase systemic discrimination? Because I think it's worth acknowledging the progress. I'm not denying progress. Pedro's voice rose sharply. I'm saying progress isn't enough. I'm saying that better than before still isn't good. I'm saying that I shouldn't have to be grateful for basic opportunities that white actors take for granted. The studio was completely silent now. Several audience members looked deeply uncomfortable. I'm trying to have a nuanced conversation, Colbert said. Nuanced? Pedro laughed bitterly. There's nothing nuanced about you repeatedly suggesting my success means I should stop advocating for my community. There's nothing nuanced about you being uncomfortable when I call racism racism. There's nothing nuanced about you centering your discomfort over the actual issues I'm trying to discuss. I don't think I'm centering my. You absolutely are, Pedro said. This entire conversation has been about making you feel comfortable with your understanding of Hollywood diversity. You want me to reassure you that things are fine now, that my success proves the system works, that you don't have to feel bad about the advantages you've had. That's not what I want. Then what do you want? Pedro demanded. Because from where I'm sitting, you invited me here to talk about representation, and then spent the entire conversation trying to convince me representation isn't really a problem anymore. The emotional truth. I just think your success is worth celebrating, Colbert tried again. And I think my struggle is worth acknowledging, Pedro said, his voice breaking slightly. I think the struggle of every Latino actor who never got their chance is worth acknowledging. I think the ongoing barriers facing the next generation are worth acknowledging. But you don't want to acknowledge any of that because it's uncomfortable. Tears were forming in Pedro's eyes now, tears of frustration and exhaustion. Do you know what it's like, he said, voice shaking, to constantly be told that your experiences don't matter, that your pain isn't valid, that your observations about discrimination are just you being negative or playing the victim? I'm sure that's frustrating. It's more than frustrating. Pedro's voice cracked. It's exhausting. It's isolating. It makes you feel crazy, like you're imagining things that you know deep in your bones are real. I believe your experiences are real. Then why do you keep trying to minimize them? Pedro asked, tears now visible on his face. Why do you keep pointing to my success as if it erases decades of discrimination? Why can't you just sit with the discomfort of acknowledging that Hollywood has a racism problem? I'm not trying to minimize. Yes, you are, Pedro said loudly. Every time you say, but you're successful, you're minimizing. Every time you suggest things are better now, you're minimizing. Every time you call it a happy ending, you're minimizing real, ongoing harm, the explosion. I think you're being unfair to me, Colbert said defensively. Unfair? Pedro stood up suddenly. The audience gasped. Unfair is spending 20 years fighting for recognition and then being told, you should stop complaining because you finally got it, Pedro said, standing beside his chair, tears streaming down his face now. Unfair is watching less talented white actors succeed while your equally talented Latino friends give up. Unfair is being expected to be the spokesperson for an entire community, because Hollywood has decided one Latino lead per decade is enough. Pedro, please sit down. Why? Pedro asked. So you can keep trying to convince me that my experiences don't matter? So you can keep using my success to avoid discussing actual problems? I'm not trying to avoid anything. You absolutely are. Pedro's voice echoed through the studio. You're avoiding the discomfort of admitting that you, as a successful white man in entertainment, have benefited from the same system that held me back. You're avoiding the reality that your career path was easier than mine, not because you're more talented, but because you didn't face the barriers I did. I don't think that's fair. Life isn't fair, Pedro said. That's my point. Life isn't fair. The entertainment industry is designed to be unfair in ways that benefit people who look like you and harm people who look like me. And the fact that I finally broke through after decades of struggle doesn't change that fundamental inequity. The realization, I think you're oversimplifying, Colbert tried. I'm not oversimplifying, Pedro said, his voice breaking with emotion. I'm telling you my truth. I'm sharing my experience. I'm trying to help you understand what it's like to be a Latino actor in Hollywood. And you keep pushing back, keep questioning, keep trying to poke holes in my reality because it doesn't match your comfortable narrative. That's not what I'm doing. Then what are you doing? Pedro demanded, tears flowing freely now. Because from where I'm standing, you're doing exactly what Hollywood has always done to actors like me. Using one success story to ignore systemic problems. Tokenizing representation to avoid meaningful change. Telling us to be grateful for crumbs while you feast on the whole meal. He reached for his microphone with shaking hands. You don't understand my struggle, Pedro said, voice thick with emotion. And the worst part is, you don't want to understand it. You want to explain it away, minimize it, make it less uncomfortable for yourself. You want me to reassure you that everything's fine now, that my success means you don't have to think about racism anymore. Pedro? But I won't do that, Pedro said, starting to unhook the microphone. I won't make you comfortable at the expense of my truth. I won't pretend systemic discrimination doesn't exist just because I personally survived it. I won't be your token Latino success story so you can feel good about Hollywood's terrible track record on representation. The walkout. Please don't leave, Colbert stood up. Why should I stay? Pedro asked, tears still streaming. So you can keep questioning my experiences? Keep suggesting I'm being too sensitive or too political? Keep using my success against my own community? I'm trying to have a conversation. No, Pedro said firmly. You're trying to win an argument. There's a difference. A conversation requires listening, requires acknowledging someone else's reality even when it challenges your worldview. You're not doing that. He set the microphone on the chair carefully. You'll never get it, Pedro said, looking at Colbert with something like sad resignation. You'll never understand what it's like to fight for decades just to be seen as worthy, to constantly prove yourself in ways that white actors never have to carry the weight of representing an entire community because Hollywood decided one of us is enough. I want to understand. No, you don't, Pedro said quietly. You want to feel like you understand without doing the uncomfortable work of actually listening. You want the appearance of allyship without the substance of change. He turned to the audience, many of whom were crying. To every Latino actor watching, Pedro said, his voice breaking but strong, your struggle is real. Your experiences are valid. Your anger is justified. Don't let anyone tell you that one person's success means you should stop fighting for equity. Don't let anyone use me or anyone else as proof that the system works. It doesn't. Not yet. But we'll keep fighting until it does. He looked back at Colbert one last time. I hope someday you listen, Pedro said. Really listen. Not to explain or debate or minimize. Just listen. That's all we're asking for. To be heard, to be believed, to be respected. With that, Pedro Pascal walked off the Late Show stage, leaving behind a stunned audience, an uncomfortable host, and one of the most powerful conversations about race, privilege, and representation in late-night television history. Colbert sat down slowly, clearly shaken. The studio sat in heavy silence. We'll be right back, he managed. But everyone watching knew that some conversations don't end with commercial breaks. Some truths, once spoken, demand action. The aftermath. So there you have it, how Pedro Pascal walked off The Late Show after one of the most uncomfortable, honest conversations about Latino representation in Hollywood. Within hours, Latino actors, directors, and writers were sharing their own stories of discrimination. The hashtags I Stand With Pedro and Latino Representation Matters trended worldwide, and thousands of people began having hard conversations about privilege, representation, and who gets to succeed in entertainment. Drop your thoughts in the comments and hit subscribe, because sometimes the most important conversations are the most uncomfortable ones. And that's exactly what Pedro Pascal gave us.